Well, welcome everyone to the Primary Sources and Teaching Online webinar series brought to you by the Teaching with Primary Sources Western Region at the Metropolitan State University of Denver in partnership with the TPS Teachers Network. I'm Keith Patterson, Associate Director of the Teaching with Primary Sources in Western Region, and I'll be your host tonight. Along with me is Kyle Claybaugh and Crystal Payne, who will be helping in the chat. Please reach out if you have any questions or comments. And for those of you who would like a professional development certificate for your participation this afternoon, we will provide a link at the end where you can fill out a brief reflection about the program, and we'll get your certificate out to you right away. So tonight, our two-part program is entitled Primary Sources Light, and will be presented by Elizabeth James, who's an archivist and digital preservation librarian at Marshall University. Judy Bee, who is the Associate Director of the Teaching with Primary Sources Western Region at Illinois State University. And finally, Amy Wilkinson, who is a TPS Program Director and Instructor at Southern Illinois University's Edwardsville. And with that, I'll hand it over to Elizabeth, who will begin our program by talking about sustainably teaching primary sources online. And I'll hand it over to you, Elizabeth. Thanks.
Thanks so much. So, hello, everyone. You've made it to the end of Tuesday. Right now, that feels like a pretty big achievement to me, and it might feel like that for many of you. So today, I'm going to dig into some of the ways that you can teach with primary sources in an online environment with variable levels of resources on your end and on the end of the student. I'll also walk through an activity to illustrate some of the points that we'll cover as well. My wonderful co-presenters will focus on additional activities that keep many of these principles in mind after our break. Since these presentations are on the briefer side, I'll answer questions at the end of my segment, but please feel free to submit them throughout. So with that, let's get to it. We're all pretty comfortable with using primary sources from people who lived and worked decades or centuries ago. But it's important to consider that in our normal everyday lives, we're constantly creating and using and trying to understand primary sources. That means that we are inherently historians, but we're also people too. Right now, we're living through events that will become history, and we're having some complex experiences and feelings about what's happening around us. It's a stressful time for everyone, especially for students who can't control their environment or for parents and teachers who are concerned about jobs, family, and students. In my home state of West Virginia, the transition to online learning has laid a lot of issues related to access to food, basic needs, and technology very bare. Suffice to say, our current situation will not be a traditional learning experience. Our current experiences can help us also make connections to the past, but these experiences can impact our ability to be productive and learn the same way. The experiences that we're having are creating an opportunity to learn and connect to history in a unique way. Learning about recreational activities or children in the Civil War becomes much more relatable when you compare limited travel and family interactions with what's going on today. But we're also experiencing a significant lack of control in our surroundings and circumstances that will negatively impact how well we can learn and how productive we can be. I hope you've heard this from administrators and colleagues, but it's okay to not be your absolute best right now. Our experience learning this way is completely new, and we have the opportunity for community and exploratory learning experiences, especially some that Amy will be discussing later today. Part of these new experiences and circumstances means that we can consider ways of learning that are different than what we do in the classroom. We can focus on fostering the unique contributions and perspectives that students can offer as individuals with their unique cultures, backgrounds, and experiences. These new opportunities can create connections between students or between students and their families. And last but not least, we are not emotionless spectators, and we need opportunities for reflection to express ourselves and connect with others in a healthy way. While a lot of resources out there focus on connecting students to current events, I wouldn't focus explicitly on that, or at least do so with some sensitivity. We don't know what's going on in our students' homes. They could know someone who's hospitalized, their parent could be an essential worker, or any number of things. Students won't necessarily remember innovation or all of the content, but they will remember if you work with them with empathy and understanding. We have to be kind to ourselves and the expectations that we have for our current performance, with an acknowledgement that learning is happening. It just might not be in a way that we're used to seeing. So some of you might be asking why this slide exists, and others might be nodding in agreement. While we want all of our students to have an equitable learning experience, that's just not going to happen right now. And we need to figure out what options and adaptations we can make to create learning experiences for all students, with an acknowledgement that the experience won't look like what we're used to. If you're in a school that's one-to-one for devices, that's great, but it still might not be enough if your students don't have internet at home. There's a lot of free and low-cost internet offers out there right now, but sometimes those can even be backed up for weeks, which makes our jobs really, really hard. Remaining flexible and sympathetic becomes really important in these circumstances, and it's important to consider technology available to your students as well as how you make your assignments available within those constraints. So I've identified here adaptations for different technology availabilities. So high tech being students have access to a device with internet and few limitations. Low tech, where students have intermittent or infrequent access to a device or internet, such as someone has multiple siblings, their parent might have to use the only device in their home, they only have a cell phone, things like that. Or in my home state of West Virginia, as is often the case, students have no access to a device or internet. A lot of districts around here are having to do packet-only work. So with those constraints in mind, you have some options through online activities, through learning management systems, shared class meetings in an online space such as Zoom, or a la carte through various websites. There have been so many great resources floating around, as well as offline and online activities that are mixed. So maybe making the initial assignment online, doing an activity online, and then touching base with the students again, and offline activities that are either structured or unstructured. So packets, general activities like reading, things like that. So with that in mind, Kyle, if you wouldn't mind reading me some responses to this question. What struggles have you encountered in the transition to online learning?
Sure, you can go ahead and put your responses to this question in the chat. One person says lack of tech knowledge by students and parents.
Mm-hmm.
Student engagement, too many tech tools all at once to learn.
Mm-hmm.
Figuring out how to engage the students in a hands-on manner. Too much time on the computer is exhausting, that's for sure.
I relate,
How
yes.
How to engage students with primary sources. Students to ask detailed enough questions to allow us to troubleshoot the problem, tech glitches, cache is full, etc. And there's a bunch more flowing into circumstances, change, remote learning, grading, attendance.
Fantastic. Yeah, the grading is tough. I know a lot of districts have been saying don't do grades during this time, or change how you approach that. That's some of the stuff that I'm going to touch on as an expression of some of these activities. So I mentioned earlier the importance of community learning, whether that's within a student's household because their family is their community or similar, and how difficult it is that teachers have suddenly become IT support, and how I'm sure you've had to use a lot of technology that you normally have access to in weird ways, such as I've mentioned my state of West Virginia a few times. I know one teacher, his grading software has actually been the only way he's been able to communicate with students because they don't have a learning management system or similar. So some of those weird bits of ingenuity, I'm sure you've all had to figure out. So I talked a little bit in the slide before last about reflection. So it's clear that we're all under a lot of stress and we're dealing with a lot of challenges that are totally unique to what we've had to deal with before. So the goal of reflection is about students and people more broadly becoming aware of their own thinking processes and being able to make those processes transparent to others. It enables the assessment of the why and how of learning beyond content education. So it can also serve as a way for students to synthesize the learning they do independently, whether it's offline or online. It can frequently be short, so answering reflection questions in response to an activity, I'm sure it's tough if a student just has a phone, you know, they can't type up paragraphs and paragraphs of answers, things like that. It's quite a challenge. So it's a way of translating student work to the teacher and also providing a brief way to synthesize that learning regardless of what kind of tech situations. And additionally, you can also get in touch with your students as a human being during this weird time. So it also means that the individual will get a chance to check in with themselves too, which is really vital. A lot of places I've been looking at on the web have recommended journaling as a way of both self-reflection and sort of DIY therapy during this time to work through some of those issues. And I'm sure we're all used to analyzing journals and other similar sources as primary sources. So being able to connect and engage students with the content that they're creating with historical content is really critical. A great thing about reflection is that it's non-content specific and can be used at any point in the learning process. So you can pick it up and insert it wherever is most convenient. And it can take many forms, some of which we will discuss today. So I'm going to talk about an older teaching with primary sources activity from the Library of Congress. It's technically a professional development activity, but I've repurposed it to work with students and teachers alike. So the original activity looks a bit like this. It involves looking at a set of items, such as in miniature you can view on my screen, and asking some targeted questions, such as why are they grouped? What are these items? Who do they belong to? What other questions might you ask? And then a teacher will at that point reveal the context and consider some of the broader implications and ask some of those original questions again. So as you might guess, what's on the screen is the contents of Lincoln's pockets the night of his assassination. However, I really like to extend this activity to be more relevant to students and teachers today. I call it your pockets, which is looking at what is in your pockets. So when I do this at school, it's whatever students brought with them or whatever teachers brought with them if I'm working with teachers. And I ask them to put themselves in the shoes of someone who is from the future and answer those same kind of questions. Other forms that you can consider are, what would a person during World War II or another period have in their pockets, whatever period you might be studying. So this activity has some natural extensions. So it includes questions such as, how similar are our physical documents to historical versions of those same documents? How might those historical documents exist today, if not physically? So engaging that digital aspect that is more relevant to students today. So asking students to examine some of their digital pockets. So if you have a device, would someone be able to understand what that is? Think about social media, text, and ephemeral forms like Snapchat that inherently disappear. Is that digital representation important? Without that digital representation, would someone be able to understand what your life is like? So these features are inherently important to their identity and allow them to connect the past and the present in a really unique way. So being able to realize that a lot of the primary sources that you study today are just what has happened to survive. And you might not be able to know everything, say, about an individual just based on whatever managed to make it to today. So this activity and a lot of the Library of Congress activities has a significant number of leading questions that can be used or reused for many primary sources. The goal of these activities is easy adoption and adaptation, and at least for me, and I'm sure many of you, trying to minimize either parental intervention or teacher intervention so that students have a chance to explore and actually think about these things on their own. So fosters independence in that way, which is great. we don't always know student circumstances, so creating activities that can be done with minimal help ensures that students are able to complete assignments and activities in a more equitable way. So with that in mind, I'm going to talk about some adaptations for high-tech, low-tech, and no-tech. So with high-tech, you can actually ask students to look at the Library of Congress's item records for the contents of Lincoln's Pockets. You can have students post thoughts to a discussion board with comments on other students' posts encouraged. Obviously, I'm trying to be platform agnostic here, where you'll have to work with your district to determine what technologies are available for use. And I'm sure this is an issue that has been discussed extensively during the transition to online. So definitely work with your district to identify technologies that adhere to their guidelines. So you can have collaborative synchronous sessions where you can analyze items together as a launching off point to completing some of those extension exercises, such as, say, examining items in their room. What does that say? What do the items in their room say about them as a person? What kind of information might they be able to get from those items? And then you can come back together or complete the exercise together and share and reflect on those choices and observations as a group. So it adds in that personal touch that hopefully gets students a little bit more engaged with the topic and helps them understand what it really means to study history. In a low-tech situation, you can also have students examine items independently, even just a link to a page that they can examine whenever, and respond to questions via discussion boards or some kind of approved platform, maybe have some pre-supply those questions where they can even just type a few sentences in and return it. Provide a brief introduction to the Lincoln's Pockets activity and have students only do the extension components, since it's tough to model some of those analysis activities when you're not necessarily live together. One thing that's great about some of the reflective components is that everyone has something to contribute because everyone has thoughts and feelings. And then report back to the teacher or via discussion board to share reflections on the assignment, again, encouraging dialogue and interaction where possible. And sometimes it's not. I'm sure we've all had to do online classes where you have to do 2 posts to a fellow student, and it can get tough. In a no-tech situation, you can provide a physical version of the low-tech introduction and activities with spots for recording answers. If possible and allowed by the district, consider how to foster communication through cell phones or non-traditional options. And again, that aspect can be a little bit difficult. And there's so many more different types of activities to allow students to explore different aspects of their lives. So for instance, students can use a number of supplied questions to compare their current thoughts and feelings with that of their parents and siblings. They can, for instance, draw a comic that shows a typical day in your house and compare it to before and after school was online. They can create trading cards of themselves, a family, or hero to kind of provide a synthesis of what aspects do they consider important about themselves. How is that established? They could, for instance, create a collage representing their activities or things they care about, or a poster or drawing of what roles they play in the household. There's just so many options for connecting the actual historical content that we're studying to what students are experiencing today. So you're going to get some more specifics about some individual activities next, but I'd love to take some questions if you wouldn't mind.
Elizabeth, there's not a whole lot of
Okay.
questions. I'll just give them a second. Pretty much just some back chatter and thank yous for your practical advice and such. So I think you probably can go on and we can catch any questions as we go.
Sure. So are there any additional things that people might be interested in on the practical side? Because that's part of what I know a lot of individuals have struggled with. because mostly I just have my brief resource list, and I've also collected some additional reflective activities as well as a no-tech activities list that was created by the West Virginia Department of Education, and my contact information, which I highly encourage. If you're interested in discussing any of this further, please talk to me.
Yeah, thanks, Elizabeth. We did have a question that says, are teachers using screencasts to show analyzing a collection, or is that part of the higher tech version of what you're talking about?
Yes, exactly. So for instance, in platforms like Zoom, there are a lot of capabilities such as markup and similar that allow students to point out specific things, or even add words to a whiteboard, say, to get in touch with, hey, how's everyone doing? Or if they notice something interesting about a topic. It's going to depend on what platform you use, but I highly recommend creating a collaborative analysis environment using those tools.
Yeah,
And yes, that's perfect.
I think we're all slowly becoming experts in whatever tools our institutions and districts and stuff are asking us to use. So
yes, I had someone share like 10 different softwares their students were having to use, and it was a lot.
Yeah. All right, I'm not seeing any other questions here. Just some thank you for your tips and thoughts. Wait, did you have a question? Are you aware of teachers' ways of reaching out, special education, ELL, or other distinct groups? It's a little bit tougher question, but.
Yes. I have not seen a lot of material specific to that. And I think that that's one of those areas where we're quickly discovering how inequitable some of the online education approaches can be. Because I think that a lot of those populations require more individual attention, that if you have a student in a no-tech environment, or a student who has no additional help to facilitate their education, it definitely requires some maybe like one-on-one check-ins to just work with the student individually if possible, because again, that equitable nature it's tough right now.
Absolutely. I think that's all the questions we have. So I think, are we going to hand it off to Judy now to go on to the next segment?
Fantastic. All right.
And Keith, I might have just one question for Elizabeth. There was a comment in there, or maybe she could just speak more on it. There was a comment in there that says, these are good higher order thinking skills and activities. And I always think that higher order means older or more advanced students, but I often find that reflection can be even for the lowest level of student skill base.
Exactly, and that's what I've found, or at least I consider to be some of the most important skills that we can teach right now. Content is tough. You can't have students, or well, it's unrealistic to have students sitting on a Zoom 6 hours a day. I know I certainly wouldn't want that, and I am supposedly an advanced student, but we can teach the skills that are transferable and will allow students to become advanced and have those higher order thinking skills that will contribute to information literacy broadly written, as opposed to just for one specific area of content. All right, I'll go on ahead and stop sharing and hand it off.
All right, Judy, you're up.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Judy Bee, and I'm with the Teaching with Primary Sources Midwest region, and I've been an educator for 29 years. But mostly I want to say that I have 6 children. Luckily, they are grown, and I just want to thank you for being on and for all the support that you provide for families at home, because that is so important. Okay, we're just waiting for the next slide. So we live in a world that is increasingly changing around us, and we are bombarded with thoughts and ideas that may be different from our own. sometimes it's difficult for us and students to understand that others may feel and think differently about events that we are all experiencing together. By examining other viewpoints, we can help students understand how others think and feel, develop empathy, and discover untold stories. Teaching students how to understand and respect different behaviors, attitudes, and beliefs will also help them become better citizens. The activities in this section focus on helping students explore the perspectives and viewpoints of others, as well as their own. Pictured on this slide are some of the activities I will be sharing with you in this section of the presentation. On the next slide, we're going to talk about thinking routines. The activities I'm going to share with you ask students to think in a different way than what they might be used to. In order to think differently, we need to help them develop thinking skills. We are going to start by talking about thinking routines. Thinking routines provide a structure for developing different types of thinking skills. We want to move away from tell and practice and move towards development and understanding. Thinking routines, as described by visualthinking.org, are routines developed by patterns through which we operate and go about the job of learning and working together. Routines are designed to promote students' thinking, such as asking students what they know, what they want to know, and what they have learned. Making thinking visible through thinking routines can promote deeper understanding, engagement, and independence for all students. And I think that's what we're headed towards, is that independence, especially as they're working at home and for their parents to be less involved or less have to be involved. On the next slide, we're going to discuss thinking routines more in detail. Thinking routines can help students solve problems, make decisions, and inform judgments. They are flexible, research-based, and appropriate to integrate student thinking across content areas. Thinking routines target specific types of thinking, can be used over and over again, consist only of a few steps, we all like that, easy to learn and teach, easy to support when students are engaged in the routine, can be used across a variety of content and grade levels, can be used by a group or individual. On the next slide, we're going to talk about Circle of Viewpoints. Circle of Viewpoints is a thinking routine that digs deeper into thinking, so that higher order thinking, by helping to identify multiple perspectives. The goal is to gain a broader and more complete understanding of a topic, event, or issue. Circle of Viewpoints is a routine that explores differing and diverse perspectives. Paired with primary sources helps learners identify and reflect on multiple perspectives. It helps the learner understand that others may think and feel differently about the same topic or idea. Circle of Viewpoints can help build empathy for historical people. Students can also learn historical thinking skills, inquiry strategies, and historical context. So a lot wrapped up in that Circle of Viewpoint. On the next slide, we're going to talk about a Circle of Viewpoint primary source activity. The picture on the right shows a Circle of Viewpoint activity. This activity was created using a primary source. Primary sources, of course, we know are the raw materials that lend themselves to many interpretations. The value of using primary sources extends beyond historical inquiry. Primary sources help promote empathy as students learn more about the viewpoints of others. Presenting different perspectives through the use of primary sources helps students synthesize events, ideas, character interactions, and also make connections to today's world. As we look at this, and in doing the activity, we want to choose primary sources based on the topic of study that is age appropriate, engaging, and promotes diverse viewpoints. We want to help students brainstorm a list of different perspectives. We want students to select one perspective to explore, and then we can give students these sentence starters to help them with their thinking. You can say, I am thinking from the point of view of, I think, a question I have from this point of view is, to have students share their complete sentence starters as they share, encourage them to be the character and really act out the point of view. After sharing, have students reflect and discuss new ideas they have about the topic and what new questions they might have as they explore. And so if you notice, this activity has a primary source in the middle. It's a primary source that illustrates the slave trade. And after brainstorming perspectives, one student wrote to the sentence starters in this way: I'm thinking of the slave trade from the point of view of the man sitting down being pointed at. It's the man in the left-hand side. I think this guy is full of himself. I just hope he doesn't pick me. I want to stay with my family. Why would the chief be doing this to us? He is our chief. He should be protecting us. Questions I have from this view is, why is he pointing at me? So this student looked at it from that point of view of the man sitting down. Certainly an extension of this could be to have him look at other points of view, the point of view of the children in the tribe, the wives of the tribe, the chief of the tribe. Notice that this group of students reflected on understanding fairness from different perspectives. They discussed what groups think this event is fair and unfair. So in the fair, of course, the chief, the plantation owner, the middleman. Some people who think it's unfair in this situation, of course, is the slaves and the man sitting down, the wives and the children. So what's interesting about this activity is that we can also use maybe a picture from a magazine, maybe a family photo. That would be interesting to have a family photo in the middle and have students draw a circle and talk about the different viewpoints of family members about a certain event. You can also use an illustration from a book that students could look at and do a circle of viewpoints. So moving on to the next slide. As Elizabeth described earlier, during these times, we are thinking more about how to provide students with offline activities, online activities, and somewhere in between. In this section, I'm going to share with you activities that students can do if they do not have access to any technology, if they have access to limited technology, or if they have access to technology with few limitations at all. So they're able to get on and do lots of things with the technology. So just to give you kind of a highlight of what we're going to be talking about, one of the offline activities is going to feature this circle of viewpoints in a couple of different ways, of this idea of drawing a circle around a primary source and then drawing lines out to show differing point of views. We're also going to look at an online-offline activity that you can upload in Google Docs where students use speech bubbles for viewpoints. We're going to look at an online activity that uses a program called storyboardthat.com. So let's get started looking at these activities on the next slide. This is an example of an offline activity. You might start with a subject or content you have already explored in your classroom, just because then students already understand about the content itself. You might give students an example of the Circle of Viewpoints activity that you've already done that they can see in the packet and see what that looks like and how that works. And you can find different primary sources, and you might want to start with students just drawing a circle around the primary source and just brainstorming differing viewpoints and just start there. And then continue on to the second activity where they actually choose a viewpoint and use the I am thinking, I think, and have questions. So to really enhance that first activity. In the next activity, you'll see that this can be an online-offline activity where you want to make sure that you choose a primary source that really shows a variety of viewpoints so that students can make the speech bubbles and really bring life to the characters. And so in this case, you could use different primary sources that you put into a Google Docs or whatever platform your school is using. And then students can look at that primary source and they can analyze it. You may want to add some other primary sources if you're using, you know, that first primary source and you want to bring in other ideas for them to look at. So have them analyze those primary sources, write down differing viewpoints, and then create these speech bubbles for each viewpoint on the primary source. And so in this case, it is the picture of the Declaration of Independence, and the main players are John Adams and Thomas Jefferson and Benjamin Franklin and John Hancock, and they're talking about the Second Amendment and how they really don't need to discuss it because that's probably not going to cause any problems. But we know later on that it has caused a lot of problems because it just isn't that clear. So then on the next slide, you'll see that if students have access to technology, this is a great way to help students think about and give voice to a variety of viewpoints. This is from storyboardthat.com, and it will be free to all students until June 31st, so they're making that available. And so in this case, you would have your students access storyboardthat.com and then probably analyze a variety of primary sources if they're really not familiar with the content, but it's always good to start with familiar content, and then write down those viewpoints, and then create this storyboard from the storyboard that, so they can put those speech bubbles right in there and choose their own characters. And so in this case, it is the King and Queen talking about, King and Queen of England talking about the French and Indian War and how they really need some money. And so they're going to decide to tax the colonists. And so it is a loyalist and one of the Sons of Liberty discussing the tax and sharing their points of view about it. And then the King and Queen decide they still don't have enough money, and so they're going to have to tax even more goods. So that could be really fun for students to give voice to these different characters. And then on the next slide, this activity, students can use emojis to express viewpoints. It can be done offline, online, or somewhere in between. For the offline, you could have this in a packet, or you could have students maybe do this on a magazine where they're actually creating the circles, cutting them out, putting faces on them, gluing them on, or you could have them use stickers to stick them on. And then also you could have them have this primary source or other primary source in Google Docs, have them download it and use the emoji in Google Docs to describe the point of views of the characters in the primary source. Students could also do this in programs such as Canva or PISA. They could download a primary source from the Library of Congress in one of these programs. And they can even download a primary source on their phone and use the emojis, and there's an app for that as well. So these are the activities that I have for you to share with you on viewpoints, and also with the no tech, low tech, and high tech. So I hope that you've enjoyed those. And if you have any questions, then I think we have a little time for that. This is our resource page that has all of the resources that I've used for this section. And then we're going to move on to Amy as well, who's going to share some more activities for you.
Yeah, thanks, Judy. I don't think there's any specific questions aside from there was a nice rich discussion about the fine points between the use of the word viewpoints and the word view perspective. So there was I'm not going to go through it all, but there was a nice conversation about the cultural use of perspective versus the personal use of viewpoints. I think that's probably the best shortening of I can come up with. But if you had any thoughts about that, you could comment on it. Other than that, I would also like to mention that the slide deck for the presentations for that will be made available with the recording, which we've been putting up on the TPS Teachers Network, usually the day after, so you can come back and gather all this nice long list of resources that they've been sharing. So thanks, Judy. And I think with that, we're going to hand it off to Amy Wilkinson. Are you there, Amy? Amy, you're muted still, so. Let me see, I can unmute her. Let's see, will that work? So Amy, are you there?
Okay.
Now I think I hear you. There you go, Amy.
Oh, good. I think I unmuted myself and then you muted me back because I
Oh,
figured
sorry.
it out. I'm sorry.
We were trying to help, of course.
I
Okay.
know. Yeah, I was just trying to do the slide deck.
Now here's Amy Wilkinson to share her portion of tonight's program.
Thank you. So and just piggybacking on Elizabeth and Judy on this time that we live in, it's a great opportunity for us to capitalize on the exploring and discovering and learning that's taking place in all of our homes as learners. So I'd like to share a few teaching ideas and resources from the Library of Congress to help encourage students to explore and discover while reflecting on their world around them. So let's see if I can get back. I'm sorry, I'm just trying to get back into, now I can't get to my screen. Hold on, I'm sorry. There we go. So we first have to think about how we could teach students to explore and discover while they are in their new learning environment. So while students are at home, we know that many of them are learning, they're exploring, and they're discovering new things, small and large, each and every day. They're learning how to Zoom, some are, using Google Classroom a lot, trying new activities outside, maybe gazing out the window a little bit more. And learning how things work at home, like a microwave, right, to cook our lunch. So we have an opportunity to strengthen our students' ability to observe and reflect while connecting to their new learning environment. We also recognize that teaching a new skill in this learning environment can have its challenges, however. So there's an opportunity for students to practice those skills that were previously taught, as Judy has mentioned. So we need activities and methods that are familiar, simple, and meaningful. So I'm trying to share a couple of ideas and examples for that. Lastly, we need access to resources that are ready to use and adaptable. The Library of Congress has a wide selection of resources that can be used with students to practice skills such as, and this is what I'm going to focus on, is observing, reflecting, and questioning while extending on what they've already learned. I'll start by sharing an activity to support exploration of nature. It's spring, so that's a very timely thing we can do. Even though we're able to do that at school, we'll see an adaptation. And then I'll share additional areas from the library's website that we can further use to, that we can use to further ignite student curiosity about topics that we may teach in social studies and science. So exploring and observing nature, that's not a new activity. We've done this before in the classroom. We like to do it during the springtime. This is optimum. Everything's changing. Things are growing. Winter's trying to go out the door. For some of us, it keeps sticking around. But we want to go ahead and take this opportunity to think about how we can do this activity. So before asking students to explore outside, we can still have students look at one or two primary sources. I'm going to choose two because I want them to be able to compare and discover how scientists observe and record details of their subject. So instead of just going out and doing a drawing, we want them to think like scientists. And I'm sure some of you have already done this activity. It's a great activity. So essential questions, I would still want to use them. However, I'm thinking about how do we keep them simple enough, right? Because they're not going to have us there to scaffold the learning and help support them as much. So students will explore the questions. Why are observations important? How is the way we record information important? Very, very simple. What's great about these questions is that we can encourage students to go to reflect after the use of primary sources by having them answer these questions. But then again, they can reflect on these questions again after they do their own nature drawing outside, or even in their own home with a plant, right? For those who are maybe in a more urban setting, who's maybe in an apartment and can't get out. So we have those basic skills that we talked about. So in thinking about what sources to use, I went to the Library of Congress website, and the first choice, if you've never been to the library, is the teacher's page. If I'm talking about easy, ready to use, I go to the teacher's page. So you go to loc.gov, which is the Library of Congress, and then you would click on the teacher's page. And in the teacher's page, you have a search box. And in that search box is where you're going to think about these key terms of anything you'd like to teach with primary sources. And when I was thinking about nature, of course, that's something I put in. I specifically put in scientific drawings, right? I was thinking of nature. I was thinking of John Muir with national parks, and John James Audubon with bird drawings, right? And George Washington Carver, who studied plants. So, you know, we have some idea of what we can search in there. And so nature and drawings came up a lot. So think of your key search terms and put them in. So why do I like the teacher's page? You have curated sets already ready for you. So one particular area that I found super helpful was a primary source set called Scientific Data, Observing, Recording, and Communicating Information. And all of these are linked, every one of these images and the sources. So in that set, there are a variety of scientific recordings. You have inventions, you have animals and birds and plants and maps. So different ways data is recorded. So you can go a lot of different ways just with this one resource. So I focused on the animals. You'll notice the two primary sources. One is the bird, the yellow herring bird, and on the right, you'll see the bat. These two were chosen because of the way they can be contrasted. So when I think about choosing primary sources, I'm thinking about what will be accessible to the students. Will they get it, right, on their own? Can they see the differences quite easily, you know, with very little side-by-side help? And of course, they're animals. And I am thinking about elementary kids, which is what I was thinking about when thinking about nature walks. Animals are an easy shoe-in. So consider the keywords. Remember to go to the teacher's page. Think about the primary source sets and other resources that are available. Another search that I had from that was Teaching with the Library of Congress blog. And that particular one is to the right of that picture of the set of sources, which explored drawings by Robert Hooke. And it's called Primary Sources, The Art and Science of Robert Hooke. The Teaching with Library of Congress blogs also will come up in your search of topics because they have so many great things out. And the fly would have been a really great exchange for the bat. It has similar things, right? It has symbols written in and contrast to the animals and the environment with no symbols and letters and numbers, so, and labels, shall I say. So again, just thinking about different choices and going to the library for that. And of course, the alternate topic of inventions and how they work, I kind of squeezed that in at the bottom of the slide because I'm thinking of the microwave, right? Or we're thinking about the toaster oven and how things work. Students are definitely more reflective about their home. So thinking about tech tools and organizers, we talked about making these items accessible. You want to take a look at what you can do with your students that you might already be doing. If you're using Google Classroom, you can make a Google Doc. So this is a Google Doc that's already created that you can go ahead and save as a copy and change out the sources and change out your questions. But you can put your primary sources in there. You can add sentence stems, and that allows students a little bit of scaffolding that kind of helps. And a lot of you are already creating these kind of things, but adding those sources in there can help. Then they're ready to print as well if they can't do it online in their Google Classroom. That particular primary source set has a complementary Library of Congress Student Discovery Set ebook. So you can see sources in that. That is an invention drawing. That's the bird in that. You can draw directly on it. So if you have iPads, then that is a really great tool. And you can see, you can choose your colors. They can observe reflecting question with different colors if they wanted to. So definitely a primary source set with an ebook is a great option. But if not, go to the Google Docs. You can add sources into Padlet. So that's the blue where it says scientific drawings, and have students post their observations and reflections, making sure they don't duplicate responses. If you hadn't already taught that with students, I always tell them you can't duplicate what somebody else said, but you can add to it, right? So one tip about that is to label your sources just like you would normally in school. This is source 1 or 2, this is source A and B. So when they respond, we know what kind of comments are attached to the different sources. And the Padlet is free up to 3. And this is a great way for students to be interactive with each other. So if you have that capability and the students are able to do that, then that's wonderful. If your students cannot, I would suggest that you just print out the resources. I think everybody knows that they can do that, right? And stick it in a packet. And then, of course, they're ready to explore outdoors and create their own scientific drawing, right? Thinking about those details, the colors that are used, if they have different coloring that they want to add. Is what they're drawing going to be in the environment? Are they going to add labels? Are they going to pull out a specific feature, whether it's an animal or a plant? And then additional support. We all know that students need more support than ever. And somebody had mentioned audio recordings. That's so important. So when we think about additional support resources for our students, I added a watch a video with Austin's butterfly that shows you in a little over 6 minutes how a first grader with feedback can refine their drawing. Or you can add a story. Scientists and Their Writings by Jessica Fries-Gaither is a really great book with scientific notebooks drawn by a variety of scientists. And it's read by an astronaut. It's part of a grant program. So that's available online as well. And it's only 10 minutes and 53 seconds, but it really adds to the support before they go out and do their own drawings. So think about those other resources that you already use and share that are short, that can be added. So 2 other areas that I want to highlight that can help students discover and explore, one being the everyday mysteries. I don't know if any of you have ever been here before, but this is a fun area. So everyday mysteries at the Library of Congress, if you just put everyday mysteries into the search box, you can find this page. So Everyday Mysteries shares fun facts and information to many of life's most interesting questions through scientific inquiry. Each question introduces the Library of Congress's rich collections in science and technology. So one strategy in using the site is inspired by the question formulation technique with the Right Question Institute. I don't know if anyone's used that, but we're just going to use a little bit of it to ignite student questioning. So this technique encourages students to create their own questions. So instead of sharing an everyday mystery question, like what causes flowers to have different colors, I would suggest that you turn your everyday mystery question into a statement. For example, flowers have different colors. So when you do that, you can have students think about think as many questions as they can in 1 minute and actually record them. And then, I'm sorry, I was going over, I have a script, forgive. Then they're ready to dive into that everyday mystery. So instead of going in and just passively reading it, now they're ready to look at that information and then see if any of their questions can be answered. And then they can share 2 interesting facts and 1 question that they might still wonder about. They can share it with their friends and family. It depends on what kind of spaces you have. So just to share what that everyday mystery looks like, and in case you were wondering what the answer was, it's pigments, right? So pigments help determine the color, and they go how these are set up is the first part is the short answer, and then right after is what I call the long answer, right? And it gives you an extended answer with more links to resources. So students then are now compelled to maybe investigate and do a little bit of mini research, and hopefully answer several of their questions, but hopefully ignite new questions. So it's a great way to get students interested in exploring and diving in. These everyday mysteries are also in categories. So be sure to go to this page and find different ways that you can go into a different category with our students or with your students, and see if they can choose one of their own. You can have them do one a week. You can do a subject that you've taught before, maybe something that relates personally to their home and their community environment. Motor vehicles, like you can see so many, weather, so many applications. Other ideas of what students can do after the mystery is they can make an informational poster or brochure, they can share discoveries. Teachers and students can create their own everyday mysteries. I think that would be fun and exciting, and then have them question it and dive into some research. For specific mysteries like the color of flowers, you can extend it by using a plant recognition app like Plantifier or PlantSnap. It identifies plants that are just whatever you take a picture of. Of course, you can extend it by taking a nature walk and posting pictures. You can use the Padlet to share. You can have them draw a scientific drawing of a plant if you've already done a different activity. They can create an art collage showing different discoveries from everyday mysteries. They can create an informational poster for their town to share plants and wild animals found in their neighborhood or their own community. So lots of different ideas. Take that same principle of the QFT. Today in history within the Library of Congress is more focused on, of course, history, right? And the application of social studies. So another way is to just, you would have to, they don't provide a question, but you would read the content and provide a statement and possibly pair that up with a source. And that would provide for a rich way to engage in questions. I like pairing the statement with the source, because if you just did the bird drawing, your questions can get off tangent. So when you have a statement, it kind of keeps it with the topic. So for example, this one's birthday. So you'd want to pair that up if you did the, the John Audubon bird drawing and then relate it with Earth Day. So definitely encourages wonder and investigation. It helps our children kind of connect to things around them if we pick the right topics. So just using the same strategies, making it light, keeping it simple. America's Story from America's Library in the bottom right corner, that particular one is for an upper elementary reading level. So if today in history is windy, like there's too much text, try the America's Story from America's Library. You can use the same technique with that to engage your readers and your students. So hopefully you've got a few ideas of strategies and sources to make it light. Also kind of make it high tech or low tech or no tech. If there's any questions, I'd be happy to try and answer them. I do want to thank everyone for being at the presentation today, and definitely get to those resources and hit those links.
Yeah, thanks, Amy. I'm not seeing any questions in there. A lot of comments about how the QFT is great.
Yeah.
The use of Google Jamboard is a great tool to use for this too.
Awesome. Yeah. I'm not sure that I've heard of it, but I'm not sure if I've ever really seen it in action. So I'm gonna have to look that up. Thank you.
Yeah. Hopefully
Jamboard.
that no Google Classroom can get it in their Google Suite.
Yeah. And I hope the
So, but
templates are helpful. It just kind of gets things started a little bit quicker.
Yes, tons of great ideas tonight. So we have reached the top of the hour, and just we'll go ahead and wrap this up. And if there's questions, we can keep an eye on things and kind of share those as we go on. But just want to thank Elizabeth, Judy, and Amy for sharing all those wonderful resources and ideas tonight. I'd also like to thank Kyle and Crystal, who have been monitoring the chat room and sharing all the wonderful links as they came up as best we could. And also to the Library of Congress for making these webinars possible through the TPS program. Yeah, as a reminder, as we mentioned at the beginning, we are making available professional development certificates for your participation tonight. We'll provide, or the link is right up there on the screen. It's the bit.ly/PS teaching online, all lowercase. Once you get there, there's just a quick reflection and your contact information so we can get that certificate out to you as soon as possible. Again, that's the bit.ly/PS teaching online. Kyle, I think, has already posted up a link to the presentation files, but we'll also make those available with the recording. What else we got tonight? Yes, and like I said, we'll be posting those on the TPS Teachers Network. I think Kyle will probably post that link in there as well, but it's bit.ly/TPSTN webinar album. But there's some capitalization in there, so best just to grab that there, or just check our newsletter. We'll send a link out for that. Or just search the TPS Teachers Network for the webinar album. Aside from that, I think that wraps it up for tonight, unless there are any other questions. And I'd just like to once again thank everyone for attending. And thanks to Elizabeth, Judy, and Amy again. And have a good evening.